the statement "once an addict, always an addict." That statement that I lived from for so long. What do you think about that statement? What does that how does that resonate in your personal journey and what you teach guys?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I think that I would much prefer to say once a child of God, always a child of God. And that, I don't think that minimizes the reality of addiction. I think it just reframes and says, okay, we need to recognize that our core identity must be who I am in Jesus, not about my struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I tell my guys all the time that, so it's now August of 2022. So I've got almost 22 and a half years of sobriety.
Mm.
I know that the old pathways, I'm a big believer in understand, a little bit of understanding how the brain works helps a lot. And pathways that are laid down in the brain, I often use like highways as illustrations or roads,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because every time you go down a pathway, your brain lays down, just lays down a road. And, at first it starts off as a footpath through tall grass. And then as you keep going over it, it becomes, a well marked trail. And then eventually it becomes a two track. And then some of the pathways in our brains that, the more we repeat them, the greater they are.
Yeah.
So by the time I was 34 years old and starting my recovery in this arena, I had a 6-lane Autobahn highway of objectification, of lust, of using my sexuality as my primary maladaptive coping mechanism for life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
22 and a half years later, guess what the state of that highway is?
Mm.
Okay? I haven't been down that highway in 22 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
But here's what I know. That road is still there.
Mm.
It's got weeds growing in it. I mean, by now there's some trees even,
Mm.
but that road is still there. And if I chose to go, even momentarily go back into my old way,
Mm.
if I were to say, okay, today's, I'm sick of this, I'm tired of it, it's not worth the fight, and I started clicking on porn today, that highway would be rebuilt very quickly.
Mm.
Because, like I said before, I love being in the mountains. I love being in, backwoods kind of places. And so one of my favorite, one of my things I'm always looking for is closed logging roads.
Mm.
Because those logging roads, they'll have trees in them, they'll have bushes in them, but the basic, topography has established an easy, good way to get through country.
Mm.
And so I can take those roads as hiking roads and I can cover a lot more ground, a lot more
Mm.
distance, hopefully hear a few extra elk bugles along the way. and and they're incredibly helpful.
Mm.
Now, being from New Mexico, I grew up in New Mexico. The national forests in New Mexico and the closed roads, unfortunately, there's a, how do I put it? There's a very low regard for those closings. So the
Mm.
Forest Service will close a road, even put a fence sign on it, and a week later, somebody's knocked down the sign and's driven on the roads.
Mm. Mm.
So, like some of these closed logging roads, even though they've been closed, even though there's trees growing up in them, all it takes is one Yahoo driving around it or driving through the sign, driving over the burn, and driving over that younger vegetation. And then 12 more people come right after it, and that road is reestablished.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
I know that maybe I've taken a longer course than you wanted to illustrate this, but it's been helpful to my guys.
Hmm.
I don't believe in once an addict, always an addict, because I don't believe in claiming the identity of as my identity is not an addict. My identity is I am a son of the King. I am a son of God, a
Hmm.
brother of Jesus Christ, and that's who I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I fully recognize
Hmm.
that even 30 more years from now, if I live to be that old, that road is still going to be like those old logging roads in the mountains.
Hmm.
And if I take even one trip down that road is going to open back up.
Hmm.
And so I think the wisdom in the addiction circles of saying, once an addict, always an addict. So, an alcoholic can never have a sip of alcohol or they'll be right back in it. I think the wisdom of that is recognizing that those pathways are in my brain.
Hmm.
They've got some weeds growing in them. They're not as strong as they used to be, but they can be reestablished like that.
Hmm.
And I think that anyone who's struggled in this arena who doesn't have that understanding and that awareness
Hmm.
is playing with fire and just wait, and the day is coming where they are back in full relapse.
Hmm.
In fact, one of the things that I've seen through the years is, it took us all in our original struggle many years to build up to wherever we were
Right.
when we hit a bottom, when we really started coming out.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you could measure that numerically, let's say that I was at a 72, if you could measure it on a 1 to 100, let's just arbitrarily say I was at a 72 when February of
Hmm.
2000 hit and God showed me a pathway out of my addiction.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay. If 22 years later, I decided to reopen that road,
Yeah.
it took me 34 years of life to get to a 72.
Hmm.
I don't think it would take me a week to get back to 72.
Hmm.
And so my experience, and I often tell this to men and to couples, is I
Hmm.
say you really need to count the cost,
Hmm.
because if you relapse, and I don't mean just like one crash, but I mean if a man dives back into his addiction,
Hmm.
he invariably is very quickly back where he ended,
Hmm.
and usually now going the next step.
Hmm.
You know,
Very possible. Yeah.
most, and that's been my experience. It's also why I tell guys why they need to be especially appreciative when their wife chooses to risk again,
Hmm. Yeah.
because what the wife is risking is whatever the husband has done in the past
Hmm.
and him going right back to there and even progressing further.
Hmm.
I tell the guys all the time, you're asking your wife to push all her chips in and bet the house and everything on
Hmm.
you staying in recovery and staying in healthy places.
Yeah.
So when she's struggling with whether she wants to do that or not, you got to understand that the incredible agonizing pain that she's been in is what she is terrified of experiencing again.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And like you gave the analogy that, or the reality really of a alcoholic taking a drink, there is a mindset that I've seen guys have that says, well, I'm just gonna test this out to prove that I can do this now. And it's like, there really isn't any wisdom in doing that. Because and that really is, I think that's gonna come out in one of your statements on denial, isn't it? We think what we think we're thinking, we're really not thinking. There's some deeper motives going on and other things. And it's like, we really just wanted to have a beer, I mean, that really was just that. But there
Mhm.
was no testing it out and seeing if I'm strong enough now. There's no wisdom in doing that. So, looking at masturbation and porn and guys that I know that's another topic even in the Christian church that can be controversial,
Sure.
whether we should masturbate or not. And it's like I tell guys, well, it's the same concept. I mean, whether you it doesn't make any difference whether you agree with that or not. I do not believe that it's necessary and okay, but whether you believe that or not doesn't matter. If you struggled in this area, why would you do that? It's like taking a sip of alcohol. If you're an alcoholic, don't play with the fire. You don't, and not only that, but when we do get rid of that, the pursuit, of our wives really does change in the way that we approach them. And yeah, it really is always better when we live according to God's design, of course.
Mhm.
um
Well, one of our pioneers, especially in Christian sexual addiction recovery, Mark Laser, I heard him at a training deal in Kansas City a number of years ago.
mm,
And he had just recently, the fMRI technology was taking off, and he had been approached, and they asked him to do an fMRI with his brain that has been, I don't know how many years at that time, away from pornography.
mm,
And they asked him to look at pornographic imageries
mm,
as a way of seeing how the brain would respond
mm,
after so long of recovery.
mm,
He and his wife wrestled with it, they prayed about it, and they decided that, okay, this, for the research benefit of it,
mm,
this would be worth it.
mm. Wow.
And so Mark said, he said, I went into it with a lot of fear and trepidation, a lot of prayer, and went through the session, and I was really proud of myself. I really felt like I handled it well, and I really felt like, okay, this was different. And it was different.
Hmm.
And so he got done, and he told the person doing it, he says, so my brain didn't react at all, did it? He says, oh no, you're kidding yourself. It lit up like a Christmas tree.
Yeah.
But what was interesting was the old pathways. He said that he did notice that his brain took some workarounds,
Hmm.
that it didn't go through quite the normal typical pleasure pathway that would typically do for a man that they'd done those kind of research on,
Yeah. Right.
but that it lit up like a Christmas tree, finding workaround ways to get into that pleasure center.
Mm,
And I
hmm.
just think that's such a powerful, not illustration, but a
Hmm.
neurobiological example of, we're kidding ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can't, especially once we have established those pathways,
Hmm.
those roads are there.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so our job is to build the fences, build the signs, build the
Yeah.
berms, and never go on that road again.
Mm. Yeah.
But with the healthy awareness that if I start down that road,
Hmm.
it's not going to end well.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So true. I think it was really worth fleshing that all out and necessary because of this word denial and so many guys. I've seen guys at 6 months, after 6 months of freedom, sobriety, whatever you want to call it, and they're like, I've got this. See, I
Mm-hmm.
accomplished that, and that's like, wait a minute, there are some potholes. 6 months and a year, those are not places where you want to start disengaging from a recovery program and thinking I could go back to a normal life, whatever normal is.
Right.
I tell guys, this is your new normal. Like, this is the way you need to live your life in real vulnerable conversations and in this type of a group setting. And but still this denial can be so thick, and it can really mess things up. I love your writing about this denial. It's such an elusive thing that we struggle with. So in your writing, in your book, you wrote about 5 modes of denial, 5 different types of denial. And I wrote them out here so we could remember them: outright denial, comparison, minimization, justification, and denial of momentary reality. So interesting in these different pieces. Would you mind taking a few minutes and talking about that topic here in these
Sure.
five?
Any of them in particular you want
Mm-hmm.
me to jump into? Outright denial is just that, and this is especially where gaslighting kicks in. Guys who look their wives in the eye and say, "No, I don't know how that's on the computer history, but it's not me."
Mm-hmm.
We've had guys who've thrown their 11, 12-year-old or even younger sons under the bus for it. Um,
Wow. Yeah.
it's just that it's an ugly, ugly place of, nope, not me. I didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's just a protection of, yeah, I'm not going there.
Mm-hmm.
And just a quick side note, the more a man has to lose, the greater his strength and gift of outright denial often is.
Mm.
Every pastor,
Mm.
every semi high profile church leader I've ever worked with, has outright lied to me and his wife about the depth of his struggles
Mm-hmm.
because they have so much to lose in their
Yeah.
mind.
Right. Right.
So, outright denial and then comparison denial. We can always look around and find somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Guys who look at softcore pornography, they compare it and say, well, I'm not looking at any hardcore. I'm not like those guys.
Right.
Guys who do pornography, well, but I've never crossed the flesh line. I've never had a physical affair.
Mm-hmm.
Guys who've had physical affairs. Well, I've only done one night stands. It's not like your father or your uncle who had,
Mm-hmm.
a 10-year affair with his secretary.
Right.
The bottom line is we can always find somebody that we can look at who in our minds is worse than us. And so therefore I can compare. And so mine's not that big of a deal.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Right.
Um,
Right.
Minimization denial. I can't, I don't get too many Covenant Eyes reports anymore because I don't have time. And I'm not the best of accountability partners in that regard because
Mm-hmm.
that's just not my cup of tea to be following up on that all the time. I'm not a good detail person, but I've had guys through the years who've said, yeah, I've struggled a little bit. And for whatever reason, I felt a calling to look at their Covenant Eyes reports and find out that struggling a little bit was a 10-hour binge and really
Mm. Yeah.
ugly, horrific pornography.
Mm.
But, in their confession of it, their confession was, I looked at porn a little bit.
A little bit. Right.
Yeah.
Mm.
And, I tell guys all the time, a partial confession does more harm than good.
Mm.
A
Yeah.
partial confession actually further reinforces the shame pathways in your brain
Mm.
because it says, the toxic shame says, well, if they knew how bad I really am, then nobody would accept me.
Right.
And so when they confess and they get a little taste of forgiveness, it
Mm-hmm.
actually is counterproductive because they know, well, but if, the enemy is just shouting at them inside their head, yeah, but if you would have told them all of it, then
Mm-hmm.
they would not have met you there.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that too. So many times when I hear the whole story, it's like, you know, it didn't make the big difference that he thought that it did. It really was not that big of a difference. A little
Well,
bit
and
more, a little
and
bit
what's
more, or a
so
lot more.
amazing, yeah, what's
Doesn't
so
matter.
amazing and frustrating to me is how often guys do that with their wives in disclosures,
Right.
or especially non-facilitated disclosures, when disclosures are done poorly. How many
Right.
times guys, it's like they, one individual, I'm just making up an example. It's like a guy who says, well, I saw 13 prostitutes.
Yeah.
And then we come to find out 6 months later that it was actually 19 prostitutes.
Right.
And so you step back for a second and you say, you know, the damage to his wife was not really,
Hmm.
if he would have come out from the beginning and said 19,
Yeah.
yes, that would have been horrific.
Yeah.
But was it any more horrific than 13 in that initial disclosure?
Yeah. And
No.
the lie
But
that he believes is it was in his
right.
eyes, that's the lie he's under.
But then when it comes out 3 months, 6 months later,
Yeah.
then it's then the minimization, now that it's getting, brought into light, it's like, what, then the deception and the lying about that, which is always more difficult, even more difficult for wives than the actual sexual acting out,
Yeah.
the gaslighting, the secret basement, all of that,
Right.
when it comes out, it's like, even when he confesses, I don't know that I can believe him.
Right. Right.
And
Because
so
it's
we
not going to
have
be all of it.
to and so we have to do the hard work of working through our tendency to minimize. And we all
Hmm.
have it. It's a natural self-protection defense mechanism within us,
Hmm. Hmm.
but we have to press through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The next time of denial I have in there is justification denial. It's the denial that says, well, I know my heart wasn't right, but under the circumstances, anyone would have done it. It's
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
Saul, when he says the reason that he didn't wait for Samuel was because the enemy was there and the men were afraid, and
Right.
anybody would have done what I did. And Samuel just says, no.
Hmm. Right.
Okay. But it's also the man who says, well, but you don't know my wife. You don't know how
Yeah.
sexually shut down she is,
Right.
or you don't know how critical she is. And so I turn to my addiction to handle that. And so there's this justification, or the
Hmm.
justification of the pastor who says, well, yeah, but it was the member of my church, and she pursued me relentlessly, and so eventually I gave in
Yeah.
and abdicated
Wow.
his role as the shepherd and the protector.
Hmm.
And instead, even if she was the pursuer,
Hmm.
the bottom line is it's a position of power.
Yeah.
And it's that expression I've used before, that a pastor cannot have an affair with a church member. It's always a form of sexual abuse, because it is a power dynamic.
Yeah.
The pastor is the one who has the responsibility to be the protector,
Hmm.
even if the member is the pursuer, even if the member is the one pushing the boundaries.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
pastor is the shepherd. He's the one in the position of power, and
Hmm.
it's his job to keep the relationship safe.
So true.
And
Yeah.
so justification is one of those places where we can, the human, our human ability to justify, we can justify almost anything.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe that, watch the news.
Yeah. I
Read
was just
Instagram a
thinking,
little bit.
I was thinking in terms of so we're talking about justification afterwards, or when when you're in the confession seat, but thinking about it from the perspective of just before acting out too. The justification is, well, this is just going to be one last time. I
One
don't know how
last
many
time.
times. I don't know how many times it was the last time for me when I acted out. Just one last time. We can justify it beforehand too, right?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Somehow in our mind, we paint a picture that it's okay. God's going to forgive you. Your wife will never has to know, whatever it is,
Hmm.
the lies and the deception that's wrapped up in that beforehand, as well as justifying it afterwards, for sure.
Sure.
Denial.
And then the last one I have on there is I called it the denial of momentary reality.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I can't, one youth minister comes to my mind. I had lunch with him. This was many, many years ago, early in my ministry in this regard. And I shared with him my story, and he's nodding his head, and he said, "Yeah, yeah, I've struggled with that in my past too." And I pressed the point with him a little bit, and
Mm-hmm.
eventually it came out. My past was last week,
Right.
or may
Right.
have been even a couple days ago.
Yes.
And it's that it's that part of it's that where we shift in our brain and we say, okay, well, yeah, I acted out, but now I'm done with it, and I'm not going to do that anymore. So therefore, it's
Yeah.
in my past, and I'm good now.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
all good now.
Mm-hmm. No, it's not.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. No, yes, I've experienced that. I mean, I've done that myself, I know. And then in leading guys too, the that I love that you named it, the denial of momentary reality. And yeah, it was a long time ago. Yeah, that's the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear that as well. A long time ago was 10 minutes, like how long are 10 minutes to you? Because a long time ago, thinking year ago, 2 years ago, I
Hmm.
started asking guys multiple choice questions, So how often do you masturbate? Is it 20 times a day, 20 times a week, or 20 times a month? And when was the last time? Was it this morning? Was it last week, or was it last month? Like that's because yeah, okay, I might not be able to remember 10 years ago so much, but certainly if it was this morning, that it was this morning, and just say it was this morning,
Right.
but putting it into perspective, I've had guys say, no, it's not 20 times a day, maybe 20 times a month. I mean, they wrestle with the different choices, and I'm like, just, which one is it? And maybe you'll get a lot more of the truth, but not necessarily. But that's yeah, the idea of the denial of momentary reality. I remember being asked that in my first, what we called it, an accountability group of men, and they said, "Is porn still a struggle in your life?" And I said, "No," because I
Because it
gave
hadn't
up
been a struggle
yesterday.
this morning. It was a seven
That's
o'clock meeting, and I hadn't had a trouble yet.
exactly right. Yeah, exactly. We really do have to wrestle with these different, what kind of questions are we really asking, and how helpful is accountability? Accountability itself has to be defined and fine-tuned so that it is actually helpful. Otherwise, it really isn't at all, and it just becomes another opportunity to lie. Now, I mean, sure, I could, if you outright asked me, did you masturbate yesterday? I looked at porn, I still could have said no for sure. And back then, I know I would have if I were asked a direct question. I wasn't ready to really work on this. Although each time I behave that way, I told myself, I need to stop this. I know it's wrong. I don't want to be doing this. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I would have outright lied anyways. But
Well,
that's
but I
another.
think that that's something too, though, that we have to continually educate our men about is my integrity is always my responsibility.
Hmm.
And it's not up to my accountability partners or my wife or my counselor asking the right question on the right day in the right way.
Hmm.
If
Right.
I want to
Right.
be a man of integrity, it is my job to take the initiative to put my stuff on the table,
Hmm.
no matter whether or not they're asking the right questions or not.
Right. Right.
And I think that that's one of the inherent um, flaws in accountability. I mean, I love Dr. Larry Crabb back in the day. He, in one of his books, he says, "Yeah, accountability is for those who are really bad at relationships."
Yeah.
And it
Wow.
was a
Yeah.
reaction to like the 7 questions of accountability from Promise Keepers or different things like that. And
Right.
believe me, I think they have their place.
Right.
And I think they have their place in part because most of us are bad at relationships.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that they also become a false illusion that says, okay, um, I'm good as long as my accountability people don't ask the right question.
Hmm.
Rather than recognizing that, wait a second, I'm only good if I'm being transparent and honest.
Right.
And whether or not my accountability people, whether or not my check in, the person I'm checking in with or not, is even capable of asking hard questions is
Hmm.
irrelevant.
Yeah.
What matters is, am I willing to be truthful and honest and transparent and
Yeah.
put my stuff out on the table in the hope and the trust that God will honor my transparency and my honesty and bring his healing hand and work in my life in these places?
Hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I love that statement, and wrestling with that accountability is only good if it's in the context of actual true vulnerable relationship. And that's so yeah, Larry Crabb was so right. It's so true, isn't it? It's accountability is what we really need is relationship for sure. And accountability could be a part of that, but we really do need relationship. And those of us that
Absolutely.
struggle or have struggled, I mean, that's part of the challenge, and part of the thing that we've been medicating and using porn to cope with is that we find relationship hard, painful, we are insecure, we don't like the guy in the mirror, and all these things that I don't remember, how many times that I would have a conversation and then I would be beating myself up for some little minuscule word that I said for 3 weeks. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. And this other person, of course, doesn't even know at all, doesn't even
Right.
remember me saying that or whatever it is. I'm wrestling with mistakes that I think I made in a relationship that I didn't even really make, or made a fool of myself. I mean, it's just the fear of loss of relationship is so strong in there, and that's why when you say, we're bad at relationship because we don't know how to do relationship, right? Early on, the guys who struggle, and that was my case too. I didn't really know how to do relationship because it was terrifying. It was scary.
One of the real common things I've heard from guys in our groups through the years is they're in group for a little while and they say, wow, I never knew I could have friends like this.
Yeah.
I never knew that real relationship happened this way.
Mm, yeah.
Because, our standard line is, my joking, not joking line is, yeah, once you've talked about porn and masturbation, you can talk about anything.
Yeah.
And so once you get that out on the table, then the daily struggles of life, the insecurities, the struggles, the reality is our world is moving further and further away from good relational connection,
Hmm.
and men especially.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so men are hungry, they're dying for relational connection, but they don't even it's so foreign to them, they don't even know that's what they're thirsty for.
Exactly.
And so
Hmm.
the groups provide, the desperation of having to attend a men's group because my wife's ready to divorce me and my counselor says I have to. Um, Oftentimes, um, is the awakening that causes a man to go, oh, this is a key component that's been missing all my life.
Yeah. Yeah. And they don't realize it until they're in there doing it. Yeah. And that's it. So true. And we need that ultimatum. So many of us, I've heard 4 out of 5 guys need the ultimatum in order to really deal with this problem effectively and truthfully. And that's
Well, that's, that going back to, you asked about my beginning. Um, that was the reality is I thought because I was the guy who always had his radar on looking for a way out. And so, to be honest with you, when I first announced that I was going to do groups like this, I was terrified of getting overrun
hmm,
because I thought that everyone was where I was at. And as soon as they heard there was a way out, man, they were going to be flocking to me.
yeah, yeah,
Well, 20 years, 21 years later, I'm still waiting for that to happen in many respects.
hmm, yeah,
And what I've learned in that time is that 9 out of 10 men come to me because their wife has said, get out or get help or get out,
yeah,
or they've been fired at work,
right.
or they've hit an incredibly painful place of consequence.
Hmm,
Which, just a quick side note, for the ladies who are listening, for the wives who are listening, it's why it's perfectly okay and perfectly good and healthy for you to say, you've got to decide whether you're going to choose me or your porn. Because
Yeah.
I'm not going to share my bed, my house, my home, my kids
Hmm,
with porn stars any longer. So
yeah,
you get help or you get out.
right.
And that's harsh,
Yeah.
but it's a harshness that
Hmm,
unfortunately most men need
yeah.
in order to take I can't tell you how many of my guys through the years have said the hardest thing in the world was getting out of their car in the parking lot and coming into our group the first time.
Right. Right.
And if my wife weren't set on leaving, if I didn't, I would have never made that
Hmm,
30-yard trek across the parking lot.
yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And and then the really cool part though is then them saying, and I'm so thankful that I did.
Right. Right. Yeah. And then seeing them come full circle where they're so grateful for that boundary that their wife set, you know,
Absolutely.
and that's possible as well. Although, yeah, for so many of them, maybe they're angry at first, but that's what, if that's what it takes, knowing that that's what most guys need, you know,
Most of them are angry
it
initially.
is. Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a running joke in our groups. I
Mm-hmm.
tell guys all the time, I know that you're not real happy with me right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Right.
okay
Yeah.
because I love you enough to let you be mad at me
Yeah.
because someday you'll thank me if you follow this course. So
Yeah.
if you want to be mad at me
Absolutely.
right now, that's perfectly fine. Talk to the
Mm-hmm.
guys around you. They've been there also.
Yeah. Yes, Daryl, I think that's, is, leading this type of ministry in this sector. We've become, we have to be okay with guys being mad at us for a while, and that's totally fine. It's a reality we have to deal with, and it's all right, that's what it takes. But it's worth it seeing the guys that actually do become the men that God intended them, the fathers, the husbands that they always wanted to be, that their spouse always dreamed of. It is possible, and they need to know that and have that hope. But that is where it starts for so many guys.
Sure.
That it with that ultimatum, and for sure, So well, Daryl, I could talk to you for a long, long time, and I definitely want to have you back on our podcast again. We need to do this again. I have a lot more questions for you, and really love the conversation. Love talking to you. What is the website and where people can get some of the resources and take advantage of New Hope and the recovery programs there?
Our website's our New Hope for SI.com. That's shorthand New Hope for Sexual Integrity. But the four is the number four, not FOR. So New Hope for SI, New Hope for Sexual Integrity. And that
Mhm.
has links to my manual, to some different audio and video teachings, our recovery groups. We do have groups, Zoom groups, as well as in-person groups.
Mhm.
Um, and then also, then I have a site for wives also, and there's a lot of overlap interlinks. The site for wives is protectingeve.com,
Mm.
and um,
Yeah, protectingeve.com. All
mhm.
right. Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So take advantage of some of those resources, guys. And Daryl, thanks so much for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed talking to you today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure visiting with you.